Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.
Objection-proof schemes permitting cross-border inbound and outbound mergers, a complete bar on treasury stock, and no using schemes to disguise creative accounting. Hello and welcome to Companies Act. Today we focus on Chapter 15, that's compromises, arrangements and amalgamations. Well, joining me to discuss this chapter are Haigreve Khaitan of Khaitan, Ashok Gupta of Aditya Birla Group, Amrish Shah of EY and Citi's Harish Hulyalkar. Gentlemen, to all four of you, a very warm welcome to Companies Act. Be it a vanilla merger or an innovative scheme to write off goodwill, Sections 391 to 394 of the Companies Act 1956 permitted all that and more. They're still alive as Chapter 15 and the corresponding sections, that's 230 to 234 of the 2013 Act, have yet to be notified. But when they do come into force, Sections 230 to 234 will bring with them both restrictions and innovations. The first thing to know is that all schemes of compromise or arrangement now require more disclosures to the tribunal, including corporate debt restructuring.
I don't think there is a material change, accepting that is making more definitive.
The new law also requires that any buyback of securities done via a scheme must comply with the requirements of the buyback section, that's Section 68. Mainly, the buyback must be 25% or less of the aggregate of paid-up capital and free reserves.
What happens if you do a tribunal process-driven buyback or you do a non-tribunal process-driven buyback?
Through the market.
Through the market or even a direct tender. There is a 25% limit. So now you can not say that I will use a tribunal route to go beyond 25%, which used to be the case under the current Act.
Okay.
So that I think now has got synchronized.
So you can't do a buyback under a scheme and violate or ignore any of the limits set out in the buyback section. You have to honor those limits if you were to include a buyback in a scheme.
Absolutely.
Is that well understood?
Absolutely.
That's right, absolutely.
Cool. Harish, are you cool with that as well?
And there is slightly a subtle difference as to why people may still do it under a tribunal route, and that's a tax point, because there could be a view that if I do a buyback under a tribunal process, I may not fall under the new buyback taxation which came in the last budget.
But having said that, now you need to give notice to the income tax department. So if those creative schemes
could
have its own issues.
Okay, fair enough. Reduction of share capital, sir, under schemes, is that unchanged?
So really unchanged. Again, what is clarified is that you can actually do a capital reduction and you don't need to specifically follow another set of procedures for capital reduction. So it can be part of the composite scheme. So we used to do schemes but follow perhaps two procedures under some court procedures, a capital reduction procedure and a scheme procedure. Now you can do it under one composite procedure, which is a clarification. Nothing really new, I should say, but a good clarification. The whole idea is that earlier there was ambiguity whether the High Court can do beyond even the provisions of the law. Now I think that by capturing all those provisions here, that High Court must ensure not only the provision relating to arrangement or compromise, but must also look at the relevant provisions which are applicable, be it buyback or
reduction of share. So you have to go back and make sure that it meets all the requirements in those sections as well.
To that extent, good.
Under the Companies Act 2013, in a scheme involving a merger or amalgamation, the tribunal has wide-ranging powers, including to provide for dissolution without winding up, exit for dissenting shareholders, share allotment to comply with FDI norms, and most importantly, for a transferee company to remain unlisted. Section 232(3)(h) says, in the case of a listed company being merged into an unlisted company, the resultant company may remain unlisted until listing. If shareholders of the listed company decide to opt out, they must be compensated in the prescribed format.
Earlier companies were trying to do, merging a division into an unlisted company. That was possible in select cases. We've seen that. Now there's an express provision that you can merge a listed company into an unlisted company and the transferee company will remain unlisted. So that's a new express provision in the new companies.
What is the implication of this?
So you can take a listed company and put it into an unlisted company, and the resultant company will not be listed. So they probably wanted to avoid a situation where the unlisted company also automatically gets a listing through a merger process. So that the new amendment addresses that.
So was it the case earlier that if you were to merge a listed company into an unlisted company, it would have automatically gotten listed?
Yeah, because under the SEBI rules, you would have to provide liquidity to the shareholders of the merging company. So if the resultant company was unlisted, that objective was not achieved. So now under the new Companies Act, they have provided that if you do such a scheme where the resultant company is unlisted, you have to provide an exit opportunity to the shareholders who don't want to be part of that.
How would you provide
company.
that exit opportunity?
So essentially there will be a valuation and the value of the shares which they will have to be given either cash or some other form of consideration, so that they do not end up holding an unlisted security in the new company.
Having said that, while the new Companies Act does provide for that, the SEBI regulations and the listing agreement don't actually permit that.
Okay.
So whenever you are dealing with a listed company, as per the current law, you'll have to go to the exchanges and to SEBI. So if you maintain an unlisted company, whether SEBI will at all approve that is in question.
Correct.
And this is a way to probably achieve a backdoor delisting in another way.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, why would they allow this then?
Absolutely. So while I think the Companies Act has put an enabling provision, it's very doubtful that SEBI and the stock exchanges will allow this.
But then why would the Companies Act allow for this to happen? Because I'm sure they can also see the implications of, this being abused in some fashion, right?
I think it's more of an enabling provision. So if our delisting provisions and the exit by merging listed to unlisted are synchronized together, and the delisting can be achieved subject to certain conditions, through a merger of listed with unlisted with the same sort of delisting parameters,
as
it just
SEBI
gives you,
prescribes.
as SEBI prescribes, you can give you just one more restructuring option as we go along, So it gives you more innovation and options for companies who might do a restructuring, may do a merger and a delisting simultaneously. But this will all be subject to what SEBI and the exchanges bring out as we go along.
In another first, the Companies Act 2013 makes an explicit provision for demergers.
Under the compromise and arrangement, everything was covered. And I think this is stemmed from the amendment to our tax laws, where we now have a specific demerger. So this is more clarificatory in nature to specifically allow. And the controversy as to whether such schemes fall within compromise or arrangement, there's no controversy left. But it wasn't again required, but it's just clarificatory.
Absolutely. If you look at the draft rules again, they said that demerger needs to be aligned or, with the tax definition.
That's right.
And therefore, I think the question that will come is, is it the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart?
Explain that.
What I mean by that is that, let's look at it. Tax definition talks of an undertaking or a part of an undertaking to be falling within the definition of demerger. Today, if I want to just put one asset out, the current Companies Act does allow it. When I say current is 1956, because for merger provisions it is
this has not been notified.
Yeah, not been notified. I can put one asset out, it will still fall as a compromise or an arrangement under 391, 394. Going forward, if these draft rules were to become rules, I can't put that asset out.
Why?
Because I have to follow the tax definition, and tax definition means that it has to be an undertaking, which means a business activity, to say the least. See, today, let's put it this way, there were companies which had land parcel and had business. So I had two choices, either to put the land parcel out under the company, these provisions, or put the business out. And depending on my situation, I will decide which is better for me.
Now you can only put the business out.
I can only put the business out.
Unless, of course, the land parcel itself is
a business activity. Yeah, I get that. I think he's talking about real estate just as an asset and not as a business.
I think that's what is top, and that's what is baffling to me, that why would a Companies Act say that you have to follow the tax definition? If there are tax consequences of any restructuring, I think the tax people will take care of it in terms of the assessment and what they need to do.
But was the tax treatment for demerging simply an asset clear, or was the tax treatment only clear when it came to demerging an undertaking, which is why maybe the IT department has prevailed on the MCA and said, look, if you have a demerger, it has to be aligned with what our available tax treatment is, because we don't have a tax treatment available for just demerging an asset.
I would look at it slightly differently. Why should the tax department go and say, don't do non-tax demergers, because then they're losing the tax revenues?
Exactly.
Okay.
No, and I would add that, you know, we have a Companies Act which is now trying to address tax and stamp duty by virtue of a provision under the Companies Act. And stamp duty have its own provisions. You know, they were spinning off parcels of land to avoid stamp duty. Now, the Stamp Duty Act has been fixed in most states to deal with that situation. The tax law has been fixed to deal with that situation. You can't have corporate law to check whether there's a tax abuse or a stamp duty
But
abuse.
let's be fair, this is in the draft rules. This is only in the draft rules, to point out
But
that.
many of the draft rules, I have to say, have become final.
And some
in
have
many
not.
other,
And some have not.
And many
So-
other
and
provisions.
some have not. So you can, and some final rules have also not been final, sir. Even those have been amended after being notified.
So
I'm not
as a contra, a possible explanation for its inclusion could be, you know, this normally arrangement and compromise would be more of a business transaction.
and not a...
Or not have a property or a standalone property, because for there is many different provisions. That's the power of the CEO and the board of directors to sell off the assets of the company under the different provisions of the act. So if it is only a property and nothing to do with the business arrangement,
the scheme provision was being
so
misused.
yeah,
then
intention
in
is this arrangement in the overall scheme of things. I'm saying, but it is beset with many problems. Why should chain companies doing it? All I'm giving a different perspective.
You're
Why
trying to
to-
explain.
That's
You're
right.
trying to explain.
But you know, as I would say that this does limit, if the rules were to come out, many restructuring possibilities. Let's take an example of an asset which is not a business, and I need to restructure just to take that asset out while I'm doing 3 other demergers as part of the same scheme. I need to just take out one property. I can do it under a composite scheme. I can demerge 2 businesses, merge 1 business, take out a land parcel which has a separate tax treatment. But I don't need to follow yet another procedure for sale of an undertaking or for sale of a land, and do it as part of composite scheme.
Yeah,
All the approvals, my tax, CCI, shareholders, creditors, all are satisfied. So the single window sort of clearance scheme which we now have under the 56 Act in one way will go away.
Okay.
You know,
That's if the draft rules become the final
Absolutely.
rules.
And commercially, you know, you may need to do everything at the same time. You know, so if it was under one scheme, as you know, Haigreve was saying, it would all happen at the same time.
Okay.
So,
I
you
think
know, you're taking away that flexibility.
And it
I
could
mean-
also be if it's not done for shares but done for cash, right? That
Exactly.
also would trip the tax definition. So if you're doing a demerger for cash, like Amrish said, you know, you may end up paying tax and you may be okay with that, but the scheme will not.
Okay, so I started by asking whether this was an enabling provision. Clearly, it doesn't sound very enabling. All of you sound unhappy
Just
with
since
it.
we are on demerger, there's just
Yeah.
one more thing in the draft rules. And again, the definition is not exactly in sync with the tax definition. Because if we read that definition, the tax definition says that all revaluations that you do will be ignored when you do look at book values. Here they say revaluations only in the last 2 years will be ignored. So I don't think any time you can have a tax definition of, you know, with that same definition, it doesn't synchronize with the tax definition of demerger. Either the revaluation is completely ignored, you know, and you can't have a 2-year window for the revaluation to be ignored
Okay,
for the
fine.
Companies Act definition.
That is if the draft rules become the final rules. Since we're still in grey man's land on that, maybe they'll listen to you and maybe this will all change
No, I
before it
think a
gets
lot of
finalized.
representations have been made.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see better things on this
All right. What clearly does seem to be helpful on the face of it is the explicit provision for not having to go to the tribunal when it comes to the merger of 2 small companies or the merger of a wholly owned subsidiary into a parent. That shortens the process, makes it easier and more hassle-free for companies. And I suppose that can only be good,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.
We'll come then to the brand new, big new provision in this act when it comes to mergers, and that is the ability of both inbound and outbound foreign mergers. The most important new feature in Chapter 15 is the provision for not just inbound cross-border mergers, but outbound ones as well. The 1956 Act permitted foreign companies to merge with Indian companies, but Section 234 of the new law also permits an Indian company to merge into a foreign company, and it allows the use of depository receipts as payment to the shareholders of the Indian company. There's just one hitch. Such inbound and outbound mergers can only take place with companies in countries as notified by the government.
I think for inbound, there should be no restriction on jurisdiction. Because if you look at the entire tenet of the Act, if you see that, it's been more transparency, more disclosure and all of that. Now, if I have a BVI company or I have a Mauritius company which is merging into an Indian company, the disclosure is only going to enhance. It can't go away because then I have to disclose it as part of the Indian company. So, I think if they have to look at this jurisdiction, it should only be for outbound mergers. Inbound should be as free as it is today because that will allow the full flexibility.
No, fair enough, Amrish. I don't know whether the wording of this section seems to indicate that the list will apply only to outbound and not to inbound.
But while
it
notifying,
seems to imply a common list for both.
but while
not
notifying, they could actually make a difference.
Yes, because
distinction.
in many other instances, rules have amended
That's
the
right.
Act, right? Some of the interesting things here is that you could use even IDRs to pay for such an outbound merger of sorts.
This is bound to happen. Otherwise, you know, how to take care without
There's only one IDR in this country, so
Correct.
I mean, it's
Because
not like
otherwise-
too many people benefit from this, but just the fact that it will make IDRs that much more appealing, right?
Absolutely.
You see this as a big move?
It is a big move, depending on how many countries that you're going to notify.
Okay.
Whether it's attractive for people to have the outbound
I
merger
suspect the only countries that they may not include in the list, as Harish pointed out, was some of the tax haven countries, right?
Just to give an example, for an MNC who are set up a wholly owned company or subsidiary company which are listed by the way, and if you allow that merger to happen, it's quite possible all of them will get merged with a holding company and this will remain a branch. So all I'm saying, it has huge implication. It is not merely notification of countries, but it is implication on wide variety of activities. So for instance, I just give an example, equal wages you get in a foreign country, you must pay here. Same country, so we are a branch, we are no longer a company. Can you sue a foreign company because it's no longer a independent company? It's a branch. So it has a number of application in terms, you know, in terms of outbound and inbound, and therefore the government is grappling with it. So to have a comprehensive notification, so to avoid any possible misuse, whether tax, labor laws, contracts, commercial agreements,
Foreign exchange.
foreign exchange.
Yeah, I think clearly, I think you know you will not see major outbound mergers till the tax law changes, because
Why?
today, let's say if this was already notified, an Indian company merging into a foreign company, and you getting shares of the foreign company as a shareholder, that is not a tax neutral merger, because only when you get shares of an Indian
But if it
company,
was a cash consideration?
yeah, cash is separate.
Okay.
Then maybe SEBI will not permit it because you know you're not allowing the flexibility to the shareholders, because you know there you will become, let's say I'm just taking an example, you'll get the shares of the parent company, whichever it is. So you know anyway you can trade because FEMA rules do permit you know you to hold shares of a foreign company. Second, FEMA rules have to change. As he just pointed on the branch, because you know branch, the type of activities that a branch can do is very limited. It's not like what you can do as a subsidiary or as a company which is incorporated in India. So again, you know those restrictions are there. So I think that's very important. The third is IDR will not come into play, because even if it is an Indian security, again tax needs to change to say that if an IDR is issued on merger, it is tax neutral for the Indian shareholder. Today, only when shares are issued in lieu of shares, it is tax neutral.
But it can happen, right?
No, let me just, I was just coming to that.
Yes, please.
When we raised it with the last FM, or the previous FM, he was very clear that he would push this once Rajya Sabha cleared it. But obviously the time was too short for him thereafter. So I'm hoping that at least the tax part will get cleared. At least that was the commitment. I don't think it should change. That's my point of view on this. So maybe it will change, because otherwise you know you will have a Companies Act and a provision which is very good, which is you know forward looking,
but cannot be used.
But cannot be implemented you know practically.
So we need the tax department to come on board, we need RBI to come on board, and we need SEBI to come on board.
That's
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And I think one very big issue is going to be valuation, because look at it in another way, it's Indian assets being transferred abroad. And you know, we are all aware about the controversies around DCF, ROE, Indian shares being transferred. So here we are may not be dealing with Indian shares, but then we are dealing with Indian businesses and assets.
Right.
So when RBI comes into the picture, we really need a fix there on valuation.
But even RBI is coming around now to the view that we don't want to prescribe to you a valuation method. We are willing to treat you like adults.
Right.
Aren't they coming around to that?
Yes.
We're all waiting for the final provisions on that. But
and if they really come around to that and they also provide for that here, then one big hurdle would be
are you not excited by this? I thought all of you would be beaming with 234. But all you all have done is raise how this will not work.
This is a cautious optimism.
No, I sound like a politician, Mr.
For instance,
Gupta,
even valuation, two sets of accounting, we have not yet adopted the IFRS. Now, those accounts, foreign jurisdiction, would be following another IFRS system we don't have. I would say there is no clarity in terms of whether the conversion to bring both the accounts at the same level is going to impact Indian shareholders or not.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to that point. I think the IDR plus this section can actually be quite helpful for inbound
I thought so
M&A
as well. That was that was the feedback I got.
Because, you know,
except that that's been slammed here. So
no, because if you merge an Indian company into a foreign company, it's not practical for Indian public shareholders to get securities of an overseas company, have broking accounts. How do you track it? How do you sell it?
Yeah.
And maybe an IDR then becomes the solution, because today you're not seeing, like you said, companies come forward and tap the Indian capital markets just on a standalone basis and have IDRs. But maybe an IDR in the pretext of an M&A could actually be
I'll admit that even the tax treatment of IDRs currently is awaiting clarity. We have only one IDR in the country. But let's assume that since this act is now here for at least the better part of our lives, that this will, when put into force 6 months or a year down the line, be a big change for how Indian M&A is done.
I think just one more aspect on this, which they have missed out, and I think they should cover, which today is permitted for inbound, is that this provision only talks of merger. It doesn't talk of demerger.
Right.
That's true. It only talks of merger.
So this is the only provision, because if you see all the other provisions, they said, the same provisions will apply to demerger, the same provisions, whether it is, the fast track merger, whether it is a normal mergers. This is the only provision which says that, demerger is not covered. Now, I've seen cases today where inbound demergers have happened. Going forward, they will stop.
I mean, again, the question would be really, was it all intentional, or was this all, hurried drafting issues?
So why would they take away the ability to demerge if they had been allowing this earlier,
exactly.
Right? Okay. Amendment Act. Amendment Act. Okay. Next week on Companies Act, some more difficulties in doing M&A under the new company law.
Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.